This video contains spoilers. You have been warned. Resident Evil 2 Remake is a good game, but what about as a remake? Hello everybody, my name is Cobra Regalo, and on this video we are going to review Resident Evil 2 Remake, and we are going to compare it with the original game. Sadly, the remake turned out to be weaker than the original. Still, the game has been praised too much for its own good. I will try to analyze every aspect of the game, or at least as much as I can. I will also use Resident Evil 1 Remake as a model. Yes, every remake should be made in the RE1 remake style, where all improves, add, preserve, sell at a reasonable price, it doesn't have DLCs, or if it has DLCs, they are free, and not in the RE2 and 3 remake style, which also cut, downgrade, change, overprice the game, and sell DLCs. Some of the informations are also taken from Resident Evil 2 Roundtable, a documentary series about the development of RE2 Remake. Let's begin. First of all, let's talk about the positives. The graphics are mostly good. There are problems with the graphics, but we are going to discuss them later. The details are also great. For example, if you shoot a zombie and destroy its head, it really looks like that you destroy its head. It also includes new weapons like the grenades, the flash grenades, and the spark shot. Abandoned Orphanage is a nice adding that shows a little bit of how the T and G virus affected the city. If a zombie attacks you, you can also use the knife to defend yourself, something that is taken from RE1 Remake. The 4th Survivor works fine, and they also include a new mode called Ghost Survivors, which brings 4 non-canon campaigns. It also has 2 new characters, Sheriff Daniel Cortini and USS Ghost G. Martinez, but these characters don't have room for build-up, since they both die very shortly after the introduction. The Sheriff died from being bitten by a zombie, and the Ghost died by being killed by William. With all that said, you think that this game is better than the original, right? No, it's not. If this game was made in the RE1 remake style, then it would have been better than the original, but it is made in the RE2 and 3 remake style. Let's begin with the biggest offenders. RE2, the original, have 2 features that gave him its identity. The first one is the A-B scenarios. Each of the 4 main campaigns were significantly different from each other. You will never feel like it becomes repetitive. To unlock them, you have to play the A scenario. After you finish one of the character's A scenarios, it tells you to make a save file that unlocks the other character's B scenario, which lets you see what the other character did during the A scenario. In the remake, the scenarios are pretty identical, similar to how Resident Evil 1 did, except now instead of having 2 similar campaigns, now has 4 similar campaigns. Using the documentary from above, some information that I found on the internet, and my imagination, I think I know what happened. At first, they decided to combine the 4 main campaigns into one single campaign that you play with the 2 main characters, Leon and Claire, similar to how Resident Evil 0 did. Then they decided to make 2 campaigns similar to RE1, when during the last months of development, where they didn't have too much time, they decided to make 4 campaigns. That is why the 4 campaigns looks almost exactly the same. It's true that it has some differences, but it doesn't compare with the differences found in the original game. If it is made in the RE1 remake style, however, then the 4 campaigns would have been made better, like fixing the error continuities. Unfortunately, this is not the case here. The second thing that gave the original its identity is the zapping system. When you play the A scenarios, you can make some decisions that can influence the B scenario. For example, if in the A scenario you activate the anti-BOW gas, the IVs become weaker, but the leakers evolve into evolved leakers. This is why you have to play the A scenario to unlock the B scenario. The remake completely cuts the zapping system. Your actions in the A scenario doesn't influence in any way the B scenarios. If it was really a remake, they instead would have added new choices in the A scenario that influence the B scenario, but again, this is not the case. They also cut some enemies. They cut the spiders, cockroaches, moth larvas, evolved leakers, and crows. They even cut the giant moth, which was one of the 5 original bosses, which makes the remake lacking bosses. They should have improved the giant moth boss fight and give a better role to the enemies mentioned above and flashed them out a little. Also, as a side note, I think they cut the evolved lickers because they cut the zapping system, which is a shame. The plant 43 has been downgraded from numerous humanoid creatures that can spray poison at you if you don't release the anti-BOW gas to one giant plant. And they did that because it wasn't realistic enough, which is a stupid reason by the way. The plant 43 enemies were replaced by IVs which can kill you in one hit. I consider this a downgrade because they behave just like a zombie and because their design is so basic compared to the original plant 43. The G-Virus spawn has been changed from a boss fight to regular enemies that swarm the sewers. This was a bad choice because 1. A remake shouldn't change something regardless if it's necessary or not, but instead improve them, and 2. The original game already lacked in bosses, and 3. There were already some enemies that crawl in the sewers, the spiders, so there was no reason for the G-Virus spawn to be made into a regular enemy. The crocodile boss fight has been made into a quick and awesome boss fight that make you use a little but appreciated thinking into a chase scene. I think the reason for doing so is because the producer Yoshiaki Hirobayashi is the same person who produced Resident Evil 6. Let me explain. For those who don't know, Resident Evil 6 is the most disappointing game in the entire franchise because it was made almost 100% into an action game instead of a horror game. So I'm going to ask, why did you, Capcom, put a man who almost destroyed the Resident Evil franchise in charge to produce another Resident Evil product? The fact that Yoshiaki Hirobayashi was in charge of this remake is one of the reasons why the remake is weaker than the original game. The bosses in the remake are much more bullet sponges than the original, especially the Birken fights. The second Birken fight has also been a downgrade because you now have to use the crane, which is hard to do because you have to avoid the crane in the little space where you fight Birken. Mr. X has been changed from a character that appears in scripted events to a character that works mostly around the police station. Honestly, Mr. X should have remained a character that appears only in scripted events, and the reason is that we already have a character in the Resident Evil franchise that appears at random, and that is Nemesis from RE3, so we don't need two Nemesis type enemies. It's true that in RE2, the original, Mr. X was supposed to act like Nemesis, but he didn't have enough time to make that. But still, Mr. X do just fine in RE2, the original, and that is because he appeared only in the B scenarios, which made the B scenarios more unique, something that should have been done in the remake. Also, the developers tried really hard to make Mr. X scary, and I think the reason for doing so is because the developers have become very dependent on using the Mr. X to try to create horror, which was a stupid idea, and that's because Mr. X in the remake isn't as scary as you think. It's true that it is annoying, but not scary. Also, in the original game, if you kill Mr. X, it drops you some ammo, something that he isn't doing in the remake, which is a shame. At least the cat, which was supposed to appear in the original game, is cute. And for those who are asking, it is confirmed that in the remake there is only one Mr. X, which is good because it makes Mr. X more unique, but it is bad because now there are two characters that die twice in the remake, Mr. X and Annette, which makes no sense. The bowgun has been cut, and I think they did that because it wasn't realistic enough, which is stupid. There are videos on YouTube that show you how to make bows out of pencils, and they can even function properly. If that is possible, so it is a bow that can fire 3 arrows at the same time. Also, this is a video game. Most of the puzzles have been cut, and some of them have been replaced with puzzles which are way too easy to solve. The ink that lets you save the game in the original has been cut, except in the hard mode. Half of the marshalling yard has been cut, while the other half has been combined with the sewer levels, which was a stupid idea, because 1. These areas work better on their own than being combined with the other levels, and 2. Because it contradicts the continuity that RE0 has. And yes, RE0 is canon. End of story. Most of the customs have been cut and some of them have been replaced with new ones. Speaking of customs, this game has DLCs. It even has pre-order DLCs, which you can buy them separately after launch. A remake shouldn't have DLCs unless they are free and available for everyone. Actually, any game shouldn't have DLCs at all. It's true that two of the DLCs, Lian 98 and Claire 98, are free, but all the DLCs should be free. The DLCs which offers customs are Lian Arclay Sheriff and Noir, and Claire Military, Noir and Elsa Walker. It also offers some deluxe weapons, Chris, Jill and Albert models. It also has an all-in game rewards unlock, which unlocks everything that this game has to offer, but it should have been for free instead of paid unlocking. It also has a soundtrack DLC, and yes, I consider the soundtrack as DLC, that it should have been for free. For example, almost all of the Half-Life soundtracks are for free for those who buy the game. The most outrageous DLC is the original soundtrack swap. The remake soundtrack is weaker than the original soundtrack, except for the Mr. X music. So instead of making the original soundtrack for free, they force you to buy it, and it doesn't even have all the soundtrack music from the original game. You also need the last DLC for the announcement at the beginning of the game, and the game still charges you for $60, which is too much on its own. The characters are either downgraded or changed, except for Marvin, which have been significantly improved compared to the original game. Chief Irons has been transformed from a charming yet creepy guy caught up in this corruption and that slowly reveals himself to be an antagonist to a cartoon villain. Even his death isn't unique anymore but taken from the Alien movies. Both Lian and Ada are much more naive than the original game. Lian because it believes all the lies told by Ada, and Ada because she blew her cover way too early and easy. Also, the relationship of the original game has been transformed from a relationship that both of them become dependent to each other, even to toxic levels, into a simple generic romance. Also, the backstories of how Lian came to the city late because of breaking out with her girlfriend, and Ada because of wanting to find her boyfriend, are completely cut. Robert Kendo has been changed from a character that protects his shop into a character who cares for his daughter. They shouldn't have changed the character because we already have a character that lost his daughter in the RE game franchise, Dario Rose, so we don't need another character that lost his daughter. Also, we don't know if Kendo died, which contradicts the original game. Let's hope that later games clarify that Kendo is dead. Annette has been transformed from a crazy but a sympathetic mom to an obsessive scientist who put her work above anything else, even her daughter, and William from a stable scientist into a crybaby. Sherry has some junk moments. Claire is now a feminist vulgar girl, because nowadays we need women empowering, that swears and put herself in crazy danger situations for no good reason, because women should be like that, crazy overpowered women, and despite all of this, they still need to be protected. As a side note, no, I don't think a character should be like that, at all. Speaking of Claire and Lian, most of the meetings and interactions between Lian and Claire have been cut. The ending of the remake is also a big downgrade because it is so cringe. I said at the beginning of the video that there are problems with the graphics. Before I say it, I have to clarify something. A game that looks better than an older game doesn't necessarily mean that it has improved graphics. For example, Resident Evil 2 the original looks worse than the remake, but in 1998, when the original launched, those were the best graphics that it could have, while the remake doesn't look so great for a 2019 game because it uses some VNT effects that make the game unnecessarily dark and ugly, and when you distance yourself from the enemies, there are going to be frame drops, something that in the original game never happened. So in a way, the graphics in the remake are weaker than the original. Other changes found in the remake are the fixed camera and tank control scheme, which have been replaced with the over-the-shoulder camera. The fixed camera tank controls should have remained, and instead they should have been improved. Fixed camera tank controls are still good for a horror game because it limits your movements and makes you more cautious about the environment. Also, RE4, despite having over-the-shoulder camera, keeps its tank controls, which makes the game more horror. In conclusion, RE2 the original is 9.5 out of 10. If RE2 Remake was instead just some other game, then this game would have been 9 out of 10. Still weaker than the original, but a good game. But this is a remake, and a weaker one in fact. So I'm going to give RE2 Remake a 7 out of 10. A game that is not bad, but also not good. I want to say that I was disappointed about the Resident Evil 2 Roundtable documentary because the participants are drunk and don't take it seriously, like they say how proud they are that they cut some things because they didn't like it, to praising the remake toilet. Yes, they said that. Before I close this video, I want to say something about Yoshiaki Hirobayashi. I think he created the remake weaker than the original out of spite for the backlash he received when RE6 turned out to be a disappointment. But most of the blame is not his. Capcom should receive most of the blame, since Capcom is the one who put Hirobayashi in charge of the project, and the reason they put him in charge was because they cared to make more money than to make a proper remake. So I have a message for Capcom. Make RE2 and 3 Remake Director's Cut Edition and RE4 Remake in the RE1 Remake style, because it is the best remake style, and for those who already have RE2 and 3 Remake, they should have the Director's Cut Edition for free. Before I close this video, I want to tell you that I have some petitions in the description below, which I hope you sign them. I hope you like this video, and I hope you see next time. Goodbye, comrades.